Welcome, friends, to another Wolff Responds. Today, I want to respond to the events in the Middle East and particularly those surrounding the crisis in Gaza. In case you are wondering that I'm an economist and why am I weighing in on these subjects, well, the answer is two parts. Number one, most commentators on global economic news these days qualify anything and everything they're saying by saying, well, there's also what they like to call geopolitical risk. That's a fancy way of saying that either the war in Ukraine or the war kind of in Gaza could at any point spill over and become an event that is not only catastrophic, but changes all economic systems and confronts world trade, world economic stability with as serious a challenge as can come from anything else. So it's an appropriate topic for an economist trying to make sense of and understand what's going on. Having said that, let me then comment. And I'm responding in part to President Biden's recent speech about anti-Semitism. As all social movements have discovered when they try to right an injustice, for example, the injustice historically done to Jews, sparked a movement called a response to, an opposition to the discrimination Jews have suffered, the anti-Semitism, as it came to be called. And the same human beings have done to fight racism, to fight sexism, to fight the discriminations that have dogged the human race for so long. And in every case, there were always some who took an honest movement against an injustice, like the movement against anti-Semitism, and used it for other purposes, hoping that the people's support for movements against anti-Semitism would lop over to be support for whatever their particular project was. That's why we have, for example, here in the United States, movements against the anti-sexism, the Me Now, the Me Too, the movements that arose. And we have abuses of those movements, people who use discrimination against women when it isn't appropriate, when it isn't there. And likewise, movements against racism. And it's our job to call them out. And I have to do that now because if I don't, and if others don't, this Middle Eastern conflict has the potential to blow up our world, as many commentators have noticed. So here we go. Anti-Semitism is a problem and has been for a long time. And a movement against that has existed for a long time. And it is my hope, as it is of most good people, that anti-Semitism is less of an issue today than it was in the past. And we're working to make that happen. But we have to be careful lest it be abused, this movement, to deal with and to overcome anti-Semitism. And that's exactly what the government of Israel is now doing. Here's their game plan. They are, and they have a name, Zionists. They believe in a state for the Jewish people. They run one of those, Israel. They have their problems, their strengths and weaknesses like other countries. But they are trying now to say to the world that if you are against anti-Semitism, you must be a supporter of Israeli policy in the West Bank, in Gaza, vis-a-vis the Palestinians in general. And that's an abuse of the movement against anti-Semitism. Because what's going on in those parts of the world is not about protecting Jews from anti-Semitism. It's about protecting Israel from its enemies, and that's a different project. It is possible to be against anti-Semitism and for Israel. There are plenty of people that fit that bill. But it is also possible to be against anti-Semitism and critical of Israeli policy in vis-a-vis the Palestinians. Millions of people inside Israel, Jewish people, are against the policies of their government, not just the policy in Gaza, but other policies too. And likewise, millions of Jewish people outside of Israel have every right to be enemies of anti-Semitism, which most of them are, without being supporters of the particular policy of this particular government in Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinians. Don't be fooled by being told that if you don't support Israel, you are therefore anti-Semitic. This is an abuse of a movement, and it will in the long run be very bad for those of us who want to fight anti-Semitism and have done so all of our lives. It is an abuse, and it should be treated in that way. Now, why does one have a view that the Israelis can and should be criticized? And let me tell you, large numbers of Jews here in America are critical. They are part of every demonstration on every campus that we have seen so far. Large percentage of Jewish people who are not taken in by some notion that if you are Jewish or if you are opposed to anti-Semitism, you must line up against in favor of Benjamin Netanyahu's policies. The first reason Americans can and are critical is that this is a fundamentally unfair fight. Right now, the Israeli Army and Air Force, one of the most powerful in the world and in the Middle East, is waging war against a camp of refugees who have no army and who have no Air Force and who have no effective defense against them. That's what Americans who are decent people would call an unfair fight. The United States is providing Israel with vast sums of money and weapons. No one is comparably doing that for the refugees who barely have a government since their society is being systematically destroyed. This has nothing to do with justifying what the organization Hamas did last October. Most people in the world were horrified by what they did. But opposition to them or their policies is not a guarantee to give a blank check, as President Biden did, to the policies then and now of the Israeli government. Nor is the world much fooled by the headlines of a recent day or two that shipment of arms by the United States to Israel has been interrupted or postponed. Even whether we know that's true or not, even if it happened, this is Mr. Biden speaking out of both sides of his mouth. He wants it all, like cheap politicians usually do. He wants to be known as somehow for it and somehow against it, all at the same time. And if you want to understand his speeches, keep that in mind. It'll work like a program to a complicated sports event. I want to end with a very dangerous phenomenon. I've been a professor all my life. I've been engaged with college students all my life. I am now. The universities where I spent most of my teaching, Yale University, the University of Massachusetts, and now the New School University in New York City, are all universities have called the police in to arrest peaceful student demonstrators. The overwhelming majority of all the students involved had no interest in violence. Their interest was in making a protest about the policies of Israel in the Gaza, the policies of the United States supporting it. They had every right to do that, and they did it. They wouldn't want violence. Why? For the simple reason that nothing would more likely dissuade other students who agree from coming to the rally or the encampment on the campus. And that's, of course, why these terrible university administrations chose to call the police. That is an act of hostility to what these students are trying to do, which is to show that they've been good students. They've studied this situation. They have a position. They are engaged democratically in the politics of the world and the country they live in. They deserve applause, not riot-geared police people coming in. That's an intervention on one side against another. That's not the job of the police. They're supposed to be peacekeepers. They have lots of practice keeping two sides that disagree from hurting one another, if even that issue arises. They go between. They don't beat up people. They go between. They keep the peace. They disrupted peaceful events in most cases. They had an interest in doing so, as I hope I've made clear, just as the student protesters have an overwhelming interest in keeping it peaceful, which they have mostly done. Last point, because it's a little economic nonsense. Many universities called the police because they wanted the protesting students to get off of private property. Well, let me tell you something. Yale University, which I know best, the largest single source of income over the last 50 years, has been government money. Your money, my money, the taxes we pay. When a university gets a grant from the Department of Education, the Department of Defense, or any of them, that money includes the money for the research plus a markup, which is the general income of the university. If ever there could be a claim that the land of the university is partly the public's, is paid for by the public in significant amounts, it's colleges and universities. And I won't even touch that they are exempted from paying taxes, which is another way public money funds them. When the police come to a university campus, you know who pays for that? Not the university. They don't pay any taxes. We pay the taxes of the cops that the university calls in to show our government that they're in line in supporting Israel against the criticism of Israel that is now the dominant position. Late in March, the most recent time we've done it, the Gallup poll resulted in the fact that 36% of Americans support Israeli policy, 55% don't. This is not a minority opinion, however much the government wants to squash it. The combination of lopsided wars that are basically massacres in the Middle East and the decision of one of the world's powers like the United States to support it is a dangerous threat to world peace and world economic well-being. Students have every right to get out there and talk about that and make these arguments. Let them be countered by other people's views. That's fine. And let the government keep the peace as this debate continues. That isn't what's being done, but it ought to be. And that's what occasions my comments today. Thank you.